Nurse Kimiko Nakamura stared at the metal shelf, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Row after row of small glass vials. Penicillin, dozens of them, just sitting there, casually, like rice in a pantry. In the caves of southern Okinawa, she had watched 17 soldiers die from infected wounds. 17 men screaming in the darkness, their flesh rotting while she held their hands with nothing, absolutely nothing, to give them except false hope, and a cloth soaked in seawater. Here, in enemy captivity, this miracle drug was treated like aspirin. The American nurse, couldn't have been older than 23, reached past Kimiko and grabbed 2 vials without even looking, without hesitation, without reverence, like it was nothing. "For the pneumonia case in bed 12, she said, her voice casual, almost bored. Bed 12. A Japanese prisoner, an enemy soldier. Kimiko's breath caught in her throat. The propaganda had been so certain, so absolutely certain, Americans were beasts, savages, demons who would torture, rape, and murder. That's what she'd been told. That's what she'd believed so completely that she'd carried a grenade in her pocket for 3 weeks, ready to end her own life rather than fall into their hands. But this shelf of medicine, this impossible, incomprehensible abundance, was about to shatter everything she thought she knew about the war, about the enemy, about who had already lost. Let me show you what happened next, what these women discovered in those first 48 hours of captivity, what the Imperial Japanese government desperately tried to hide, because this isn't just a story about medicine or food or kindness. This is a story about the exact moment when propaganda met reality, and reality won. June 22nd, 1945, 4:47 in the morning. The cave smelled like death had taken up permanent residence, copper and rot and human waste, mixed with the sulfur stink of old explosions. Kimiko Nakamura pressed her back against the wet limestone wall, feeling the vibrations of artillery fire somewhere above. Her white nursing uniform, once white, now the color of rust and mud, clung to her skeletal frame. She was 19 years old. The Himiyori Student Nursing Corps had been mobilized 3 months earlier. 87 schoolgirls and teachers told they would serve the emperor by tending to wounded soldiers, told it would be an honor, told they would return home as heroes. 53 of them were already dead. "Nakamura-san," the whisper came from her left. Yuki Tanaka, 16, her classmate from Shuri Girls High School. The girl's face was gray in the dim light of their last candle. "Do you still have the grenade?" Kimiko's hand moved automatically to her pocket. The cold metal was still there. 2 grenades, actually. One for her, one for Yuki, issued by Lieutenant Hayashi 3 days ago when the American advance had cut off their retreat. "Better than capture," he'd said, his eyes wild with fever from his infected leg wound. "They will do things to you. Terrible things. Things I cannot speak aloud. Death is mercy. Death is honor." The lieutenant was gone now, taken by infection or despair or both. Outside the cave mouth, voices shouted in English, heavy boots on rock, the metallic click of rifles being readied. Yuki's hand found Kimiko's in the darkness. Both girls' palms were slick with sweat despite the cave's chill. "On 3, Yuki whispered. Kimiko's fingers closed around the grenade. "Pull the pin, count to 3, end it cleanly." That was the instruction, quick, painless, honorable. She had watched her anatomy teacher, Fumiko-sensei, do exactly this 4 days ago. The older woman had smiled, actually smiled, and said, "For the Emperor," before the explosion turned her into red mist. Kimiko's thumb found the pin. "Nakamura," another voice hissed from deeper in the cave. "Haruko Yamamoto, 23, their unit's senior nurse. Don't, please, not yet." "They're coming, I know." Haruko crawled forward, her movements careful, deliberate. "But I've been thinking. 3 months we've been told Americans are monsters. 3 months of Lieutenant Hayashi's stories. But has anyone actually seen proof?" "The propaganda films—" "Propaganda," Haruko said flatly. "That's the word you just used. Doesn't that strike you as strange? That we call it propaganda, but believe it completely?" The voices outside grew louder. Closer. A beam of light swept across the cave entrance. "Come out. Hands up. We know you're in there." Kimiko's heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. This was it. The moment. Die with honor or face. What? Torture, rape, dismemberment. Every film, every lecture, every whispered story had painted the same picture. American soldiers were animals. "I'm going out," Haruko said suddenly. "Haruko-san, no, if they kill me, you'll hear the shots. Then you can use your grenades." Haruko's voice was steady, eerily calm. "But if they don't, if there's even a chance the propaganda is lies, isn't that worth knowing?" Before Kimiko could respond, Haruko stood and walked toward the entrance, hands raised high above her head. "Don't shoot," she called out in broken English. "Nurse, we are nurses. We surrender." Kimiko held her breath, counted seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, no shots. 5, 6, 7, still no shots. "Come on out, ma'am." The American voice was young, Southern accent, almost gentle. "Nice and slow. Anyone else in there?" 7 more, Haruko called back. "All women, all nurses, some wounded." "All right, bring 'em out. Nobody's going to hurt you." Kimiko's fingers went numb around the grenade. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Where was the violence, the screaming, the immediate assault? Yuki looked at her, eyes wide with confusion and terror, and something else. Hope. Maybe. "Come on," Kimiko whispered, making a decision that would haunt and define the rest of her life. "We go together." They emerged into the brutal brightness of dawn, hands raised, expecting bullets or bayonets or worse. What they got instead was water. A young Marine, couldn't have been more than 20, held out a canteen. "You thirsty, ma'am? You look real dehydrated." Kimiko stared at the canteen like it might explode. Poison. Some kind of trick. The Marine unscrewed the cap and took a drink himself, then offered it again. "See, just water. Go on." The liquid hit her throat like salvation, clean, cold, not the brackish cave water that had given half their unit dysentery, not the dirty rainwater they'd collected in helmets. Just water. Pure water. She drank until she choked. Easy, easy. The Marine's hand was on her shoulder. She flinched violently, but he just steadied her, his touch clinical, brief. "Small sips. Your stomach's probably in bad shape." A corpsman appeared, medical bag already open. He looked at Kimiko's arm, a week-old shrapnel wound, festering and swollen, and his expression darkened. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "How long has this been infected?" Kimiko didn't understand the English words, but his tone was clear. Not disgust, not anger, concern. He pulled out gauze, antiseptic, and a small glass vial. Penicillin. The word was written in English on the label, but Kimiko recognized it instantly. The miracle drug. The substance they'd heard whispered about in medical lectures. The American medicine that could cure infections overnight. The drug that Japan couldn't manufacture in sufficient quantities. The corpsman injected a full dose into her arm, without hesitation. For an enemy prisoner. Kimiko felt something crack inside her chest. Not physically, psychologically. The first hairline fracture in the wall of certainty she'd been building for 3 months. "All right, ladies," a sergeant called out, his voice carrying that same incongruous gentleness. "We're going to get you to a field hospital, get you cleaned up, fed, checked out properly. Can you walk or do you need stretchers?" Haruko translated, her voice shaking. 3 of the women couldn't walk. Malnutrition and dysentery had stolen their strength completely. The Americans produced stretchers immediately. Not crude bamboo frames, but proper canvas stretchers with metal poles. They lifted the weakest women with practiced care, as if they were transporting their own wounded, as if they were human beings. The march to the field hospital took 47 minutes. Kimiko counted every second, waiting for the moment when the mask would drop, when the Americans would reveal their true nature, when the violence would begin. It didn't come. Instead, they walked through a landscape of organized abundance that made Kimiko's head spin. Supply depots stretched for hundreds of yards, Crates of ammunition, food, medical supplies, all stacked in neat rows. Trucks rumbled past, their engines healthy and well-maintained. Soldiers who looked well-fed, clean-shaven, their uniforms intact. This wasn't an army on the edge of collapse. This was an army that had already won. The field hospital. The tent was enormous, white canvas stretched over metal frames with actual electric lights powered by generators. The steady hum of machinery replaced the silence of the caves. Inside, the smell hit first. Not decay, not gangrene, not death. Disinfectant, soap, medicine. Rows of cots lined both sides of the tent, each with clean white sheets. Not bloody rags, not bare dirt. Actual sheets. A nurse approached, American, blonde, maybe 25, wearing a crisp uniform with a Red Cross armband. She smiled at Kimiko. Actually smiled. No fear, no disgust. "Welcome," she said in halting Japanese, the accent terrible, but the effort clear. "I am Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. You are safe here." Safe. The word felt obscene. Lieutenant Mitchell guided them to a processing area where 3 doctors waited. 2 men, 1 woman. The woman doctor, Captain Elizabeth Chen, her name tag read, looked at the 7 Japanese women with clinical assessment but no hostility. "First priority is triage," she said crisply, switching between English and serviceable Japanese. "Anyone with active bleeding, difficulty breathing, or signs of sepsis." Kimiko raised her hand slowly, pointing to Yuki. The young girl's breathing had grown labored during the march. Captain Chen moved immediately, stethoscope already in hand. She listened to Yuki's lungs, her expression darkening. Pneumonia. Advanced. She looked up at a nearby corpsman. "Bed 7. Oxygen 2 vials of penicillin immediately and start a saline drip. She's severely dehydrated." 2 vials. Just like that. No hesitation, no calculation of cost or value. For a 16-year-old enemy schoolgirl. Yuki was whisked away to a cot where an oxygen mask was fitted over her face within seconds. Kimiko watched, feeling that crack in her certainty widen into a chasm. "Next," Captain Chen said, turning to Kimiko. "Let me see that arm." The examination was thorough and shockingly gentle. Captain Chen cleaned the wound with antiseptic that stung like fire, but her hands never wavered, never pressed unnecessarily hard. "You're lucky," she said, threading a suture needle. "Another week and you'd have lost the arm, possibly your life." As she stitched, each movement precise, professional, Kimiko found her voice. "Why?" The word came out in Japanese, barely a whisper. Captain Chen looked up, understanding in her eyes despite the language barrier. Lieutenant Mitchell translated quietly. "Why what?" "Why do you help us? We are enemy. We tried to kill you." The captain set down her needle for a moment, meeting Kimiko's gaze directly. "Because you're patients," she said simply. "That's my job, not to ask who you fought for, just to treat what's broken." Lieutenant Mitchell's translation hung in the air like a revelation. "Because you're patients, not prisoners, not enemies, not animals. Patients. And if you find this moment as shocking as Kimiko did, as impossible as she believed it to be, hit that like button. Because what happens next will show you just how deep this transformation goes. Now let me tell you about the meal that changed everything. The meal dinner arrived at 1800 hours. Kimiko had been moved to a recovery tent with 11 other Japanese women prisoners. They sat on actual cots with actual pillows, wearing clean hospital gowns that smelled of soap instead of death. The sheer comfort of it felt wrong, dangerous. Surely this was the setup before the punishment began. But then the food arrived. An American enlisted man, Private Rodriguez his name tag read, wheeled in a cart loaded with metal trays. He distributed them with the same casual efficiency as everything else the Americans did. "Chow time, ladies," he said cheerfully, placing a tray in front of Kimiko. She stared at it, unable to process what she was seeing. White rice. Not the brown, weevil-infested grains they'd been surviving on. Perfect white rice, steaming in quantities she hadn't seen since before the war. Canned meat, an entire portion, not the paper-thin slices rationed to soldiers. White bread, 2 slices, soft, fresh, fruit cocktail and syrup. The can still had its label, Del Monte, U.S. Army supply. And chocolate, a small bar wrapped in brown paper with Hershey's printed across it. "What is this?" Haruko whispered, staring at her own identical tray. "They're regular rations," Lieutenant Mitchell explained, appearing beside them with her own tray. She sat down on an empty cot across from them, completely unafraid. "Same as what every soldier gets. You're prisoners of war, which means you get the same food as us. Geneva Convention." Kimiko picked up the chocolate bar with trembling fingers. She'd heard of chocolate, seen pictures, never tasted it. "Go ahead," Mitchell urged, biting into her own bar to demonstrate. "It's good. Probably a little melted from the heat, but still good." The chocolate dissolved on Kimiko's tongue, sweet and rich and utterly foreign. She had to close her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. In the caves, they'd survived on a handful of rice per day. Rice mixed with sawdust to make it stretch. Men had died fighting over scraps. She'd watched a soldier beat another man unconscious over a can of spoiled fish. And here, the Americans, the supposed barbarians, were giving their enemies chocolate. Across the tent, Yuki was sitting up slightly, the oxygen mask pushed aside, eating fruit cocktail with a spoon. Her color had already improved. The penicillin was working, already working. In the caves, she would have been dead by morning. "I don't understand," Kimiko said in Japanese, knowing Mitchell might not comprehend, but needing to say it anyway. "We were told. Everything we were told." "Was lies," Haruko finished quietly. She was staring at her rice, her expression twisted between hunger and something like grief. All of it. Every single word. A groan came from the far end of the tent. One of the Japanese prisoners, a civilian woman found in the caves, probably in her 40s, was clutching her stomach. Captain Chen appeared immediately, stethoscope in hand. "What's wrong?" "Eating too fast," Lieutenant Mitchell translated after speaking with the woman. "Her stomach can't handle it. She's been starving too long." "All right, slow down, everyone," Chen called out, addressing the whole tent. "Small portions. Your digestive systems need time to adjust. Don't make yourselves sick." She spent the next 10 minutes going cot to cot, advising each woman on portion control like they were patients she actually cared about, rather than enemy prisoners she was obligated to feed. Kimiko forced herself to eat slowly, even though every instinct screamed to devour everything immediately. Between bites, she watched the Americans working around the tent. A corpsman checking IV drips, a nurse adjusting a bandage, Lieutenant Mitchell laughing at something Private Rodriguez said. They looked normal. Tired? Yes. Strained from weeks of combat. But human. Recognizably, undeniably human. Not one of them looked at the Japanese prisoners with hatred or even disgust. Just professional detachment mixed with occasional sympathy. "Nakamura-san." Yuki's voice was stronger now, the wheeze in her lungs already less pronounced. "What's going to happen to us?" It was the question they'd all been avoiding. "I don't know," Kimiko admitted, but she found herself adding, "But I don't think it's what we expected." That night, lying on a clean cot with a full stomach for the first time in months, Kimiko couldn't sleep. Her mind kept returning to the same images, playing them over and over like a broken film reel. The penicillin vials, dozens of them just sitting on a shelf. The oxygen mask fitted over Yuki's face without hesitation. The chocolate bar. Lieutenant Hayashi's voice echoed in her memory. "They will do things to you. Terrible things." But they hadn't. They'd done medicine. They'd done food. They'd done professional care delivered with the same standards they'd apply to their own wounded. And that, somehow, was more terrifying than any torture could have been. Because if the Americans weren't monsters, then what did that make the people who'd told her they were? The transformation. The next morning brought what Captain Chen called dental rounds. A mobile dental unit had set up in an adjacent tent, actual dental equipment powered by generators, with proper lights and tools. Kimiko had seen the Imperial Army's dental care, a pair of pliers and some whiskey if you were lucky. This was a fully equipped clinic. We're checking everyone for infections, abscesses, anything that needs immediate attention, Lieutenant Mitchell explained as she guided the Japanese women into a waiting area. Dental health affects overall health. Infections can kill just as easily as bullets. One by one, the women were examined. Kimiko watched as the American dentist, Major Thomas Walsh, treated each patient with the same careful attention. When he reached Yuki, he spent extra time examining her mouth, his expression troubled. "Severe malnutrition has caused gum disease," he told Captain Chen, who translated. "I need to extract 3 teeth that are beyond saving, but we'll do it properly, with anesthesia." Anesthesia. For a prisoner, for 3 rotten teeth. The procedure took 20 minutes. Yuki emerged with gauze packed into her mouth and a dazed expression, but no pain. Major Walsh handed her a small packet of pain medication, actual pills in individual wrapping, and instructions for care. "Take one every 6 hours if it hurts," he said through Mitchell's translation. "Come back in 3 days so we can check healing." Kimiko's turn came next. Her teeth were in better condition, no extractions needed, but Major Walsh found a cavity that needed filling. "This will hurt a little," he warned, preparing a drill that looked frighteningly advanced, "but I'll numb it first." The injection of Novocaine was a pinprick, then nothing. Her jaw went numb and dead, and Major Walsh worked with practiced efficiency, drilling and filling with some kind of silver amalgam. When he finished, he held up a small mirror so she could see. "Good as new," he said, smiling. "Should last you years if you take care of it." Years. As if he expected her to live for years. As if her life had value extending beyond this moment. As if she was worth the cost of silver filling and anesthetic in his time. Walking back to the recovery tent, Kimiko found Haruko sitting outside on a folding chair, face turned toward the afternoon sun. The older woman looked transformed already, clean, fed, her infected wounds healing under proper bandages. "I spoke with Lieutenant Mitchell," Haruko said without preamble. "Asked her about the Geneva Convention they keep mentioning. And it's an international treaty, rules for how prisoners of war must be treated. Food, medical care, shelter, protection from violence." Haruko's voice was hollow. "The Americans follow it religiously. They keep records of every prisoner, every medical treatment. They're documenting everything. Why? Because the alternative is what we almost did to ourselves in that cave." Haruko looked at Kimiko directly. "They know we were told to commit suicide rather than surrender. They know we believed they were monsters. And they're proving otherwise, systematically, with every meal and every bandage and every vial of penicillin. But why?" The question burst out of Kimiko with more force than she intended. "We're enemies. We killed their soldiers. Why do they care?" "I don't know," Haruko admitted, "but I think this is just how they wage war. Not just with guns and bombs, but with this." She gestured at the hospital complex around them. "With abundance, with organization, with medicine that actually works." That evening, Kimiko volunteered to help the American nurses with evening rounds. It felt wrong to lie idle when her medical training could be useful, even if that training seemed pathetically inadequate compared to what she was witnessing. Lieutenant Mitchell accepted immediately, clearly pleased. She assigned Kimiko to help with basic tasks, taking temperatures, changing dressings, distributing medication. The tent held 93 patients. Kimiko counted them. 37 were American soldiers wounded in combat. 56 were Japanese, soldiers, civilians, women, even a few children found orphaned in the caves. Every single one received identical care. She watched Captain Chen spend 40 minutes stabilizing a Japanese soldier's compound leg fracture, setting it with proper splints and casts. The same soldier who 2 days ago had been firing at American positions. The same soldier whose comrades had killed American boys. You waste medicine on him, Kimiko said without thinking, then immediately regretted the words. Captain Chen looked at her, and for the first time, Kimiko saw a flash of something harder in the doctor's eyes. We don't waste medicine, she said quietly. We practice medicine. There's a difference. And if you're going to help in this tent, you need to understand that difference. I don't. When I see a patient, I don't see American or Japanese. I don't see friend or enemy. I see a human being with an injury that I have the skill to fix. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. Your military taught you that some lives matter more than others, that sacrifice for the emperor is the highest good, that the individual is nothing. She gestured around the tent. We believe differently. We believe every individual life has value, that even in war, even between enemies, there are lines we don't cross. That's not weakness. That's civilization. The words hit Kimiko like a physical blow, not weakness, civilization. She had been taught that mercy was weakness, that compassion was betrayal, that self-sacrifice was the ultimate virtue. But what if that teaching had been the real weakness, the real betrayal? Late that night, unable to sleep again, Kimiko found herself standing in front of that metal shelf, the one with the penicillin vials. She counted them in the dim light. 73 vials. Each one could save a life. Each one cost money, resources, industrial capacity. And the Americans had so many they kept them on an open shelf like they were nothing special. She thought about Lieutenant Hayashi, dying of an infected leg wound because they had no antibiotics. Thought about the 17 soldiers she'd watched die screaming. Thought about Fumiko-sensei choosing a grenade over capture. All those deaths, all that suffering, all of it preventable. If they'd had what the Americans had, if they'd had this abundance, this medical capability, this industrial might. The war had been over before it started. Japan had just refused to see it. Can't sleep. Kimiko spun around to find Captain Chen standing behind her, holding 2 cups of coffee. I brought you this, Chen said, offering 1 cup. Figured you might need it. First week of night shift is always the hardest. The coffee was hot, bitter, and impossibly good. Real coffee, not the acorn substitute they'd been drinking in Japan. Why do you do this? Kimiko asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Why treat us like we matter? Chen sipped her coffee, considering the question seriously. You want the practical answer or the real one? Both. Practically, we follow the Geneva Convention because when our soldiers get captured, we want them treated humanely too. It's reciprocal self-interest. Chen paused. But the real answer, I became a doctor to heal people, not to judge them, not to decide who deserves healing based on what uniform they wear, just to heal. She set down her coffee cup and looked at Kimiko directly. You're a nurse, right? Student nurse. Was. I was a student nurse. Why did you want to become one? The question caught Kimiko off guard. When had anyone asked her that? Lieutenant Hayashi had never asked. Her teachers had never asked. The propaganda films had told her it was her duty, her honor, her service to the emperor. But why had she actually chosen it? I wanted to help people, she said finally, the words feeling strange in her mouth. To make them better, to stop pain. Then you're a nurse, Chen said simply. The war doesn't change that. The uniform doesn't change that. Your country's propaganda doesn't change that. She smiled, tired but genuine. You wanted to help people, so help. That's all medicine ever is. Just help, over and over, until the helping becomes who you are. The reckoning. 6 days into captivity, something shifted. The Japanese women prisoners had settled into a routine, helping with nursing duties during the day, eating regular meals, sleeping on clean cots. The physical transformation was remarkable. Color returning to hollow cheeks, wounds healing, strength slowly rebuilding. But the psychological transformation was slower, harder, more painful. It came to a head on June 28th. That afternoon, a supply truck arrived with newspapers and magazines from Saipan, American publications already weeks old, but they included photographs, lots of photographs. Lieutenant Mitchell brought a stack to the recovery tent, thinking the women might want something to read. She didn't realize what was in them. Kimiko picked up Life magazine, flipped it open, and found hell. The photographs were from Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Buchenwald, liberated concentration camps in Germany, bodies stacked like firewood, living skeletons staring at cameras with hollow eyes, mass graves being bulldozed. The captions were in English, but the images needed no translation. "Oh my God!" Lieutenant Mitchell snatched the magazine away, her face horrified. "I'm so sorry, I didn't... These shouldn't have been..." But it was too late. Other women had opened other magazines, found other photographs. Europe was half a world away, but horror was universal. Haruko was staring at an image of emaciated prisoners behind barbed wire, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. "This is what they meant," she whispered. "When they said the Americans followed rules, when they said Geneva Convention, they meant they're not. They're not like this." Yuki was crying, silently, tears streaming down her face as she looked at photographs of children, dead children, murdered children. "We were told we were fighting the demons," she said, her voice broken. "We were told America was evil, that we had to win or suffer worse than death. But look at this. This is what evil actually looks like." Kimiko felt something break inside her chest. Not a crack this time, a complete shattering. Because Yuki was right. They had been shown these images, or similar ones, in propaganda films. But in those films, the captions had claimed they were photographs of American atrocities in Asia. Chinese civilians murdered by American forces. Korean villages burned by American soldiers. Lies. All lies. The images were real, but the perpetrators had been Germany, Japan's ally, the nation they'd been told represented civilization and order and racial purity. And if that was a lie, then what else had been a lie? Everything. The answer came back with terrible clarity. Everything had been a lie. Captain Chen found them an hour later, all 12 Japanese women sitting in stunned silence, magazines scattered around them like evidence at a crime scene. "I'm sorry you saw those," Chen said quietly, settling onto a cot. "I'm sorry anyone has to see those. But maybe it's important that you did." "Why?" Haruko's voice was raw. "Why is it important that we see how our allies treated human beings like garbage? Because now you understand why we fight the way we do." Chen picked up one of the magazines, looked at the photographs without flinching. She'd clearly seen them before. "This is what happens when you decide some humans aren't really human, when you create categories of people who don't deserve basic dignity, when you build a system based on the idea that might makes right, and the weak deserve to suffer." She set the magazine down carefully. "We're not perfect. God knows America has its own sins, its own failures. But we decided a long time ago that there are lines, rules, standards we hold ourselves to, even when fighting people who don't hold themselves to those same standards." "The Geneva Convention," Kimiko said numbly. "Among other things." Chen looked around at the women, her expression simultaneously harsh and compassionate. "You were told we were monsters, that surrender meant torture and death. But what you've experienced here, the medicine, the food, the dental care, this isn't unusual kindness. This is just the minimum, the baseline, what we're required to do by our own laws and values." "But why?" Yuki asked, echoing the question they'd all been asking since that first day. "Why have those rules when your enemy doesn't follow them?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Because," she said finally, "someone has to remember what it means to be human. Someone has to hold the line. Otherwise, we all become this." She gestured at the photographs. We all become the thing we're fighting against. That night Kimiko lay awake again, but this time her sleeplessness wasn't from confusion or fear. It was from grief. Grief for Fumiko-sensei, who died believing a lie. Grief for the 17 soldiers who'd screamed themselves to death in that cave for want of penicillin that existed by the thousands just miles away. Grief for Lieutenant Hayashi, who'd handed 2 teenage girls grenades and told them it was mercy. Grief for herself, for the girl she'd been 6 days ago, so certain of her righteousness, so sure of her cause. That girl was dead now. Killed not by American bullets, but by American medicine, by chocolate bars and dental fillings and penicillin vials stacked on open shelves, by the simple, devastating act of being treated like a human being. Subscribe now if you want more stories like this, true accounts that history tried to forget. Because what I'm about to tell you next might be the most important part. The choice. 3 weeks into captivity, Captain Chen called Kimiko into her office. The office was just a corner of the medical tent, partitioned off with canvas, containing a folding desk, 2 chairs, and filing cabinets full of patient records. Chen sat behind the desk, looking tired but purposeful. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the empty chair. Kimiko sat, her heart suddenly pounding. This was it. Whatever came next, trial, imprisonment, deportation, it would start here. Instead, Chen pushed a paper across the desk. "This is a job offer," she said. Kimiko blinked. "A what?" "We're setting up a longer-term medical facility for Japanese civilians and POWs. We need native speakers who have medical training. Lieutenant Mitchell recommended you. She says you're smart, you learn fast, and you actually give a damn about patient care." I don't understand." "It's pretty simple. You work for us. Help treat Japanese patients, translate for doctors, assist with nursing duties. In exchange, you get regular pay, better housing, and when the war ends, you'll have work experience that matters." Chen leaned back in her chair, studying Kimiko's face. "I'm not going to lie to you. A lot of Japanese soldiers and civilians died in this battle. Tens of thousands, maybe more. The island is devastated. Whatever life you had before, it's gone. But you can build something new, starting here if you want." Kimiko's mind reeled. A job, working for the Americans, helping treat her own people as a, what? Collaborator, traitor, or just a nurse. "What if I refuse?" she asked quietly. "Then you go to the POW camp with everyone else. You'll still be fed, still get medical care, still be treated according to Geneva Convention. But you'll be behind barbed wire instead of working in a hospital. Your choice." Your choice. Those 2 words carried more weight than Captain Chen probably realized. In 3 years of war, Kimiko had never been given a choice. Join the nursing corps. It wasn't a request. Mobilize to Okinawa. It wasn't optional. Die rather than surrender. It was an order. Now an American doctor was offering her something revolutionary, agency. "Can I think about it?" Kimiko asked. "Take 48 hours, Chen said. "Talk to the other women, see what they think. This offer extends to anyone with medical training who wants to take it." Kimiko found Haruko outside the tent helping sort medical supplies. The older woman had taken to the work with fierce dedication, as if staying busy could outrun her thoughts. "Captain Chen offered me a job," Kimiko said without preamble. Haruko's hand stilled over a box of gauze. "What kind of job?" "Nursing? Translating. Working in the new medical facility they're building." "And you're considering it. Are you judging me?" Haruko was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the red cross printed on the gauze packaging. "No," she said finally. "I'm envying you. She didn't offer me anything." "She might. Lieutenant Mitchell said anyone with medical training—" "I'm 23, Haruko interrupted. "Old enough to have made real choices before the war. Choices I regret now. I chose to believe the propaganda. Chose to volunteer for this. Chose to help Lieutenant Hayashi convince teenage girls to carry grenades." Her voice cracked. "Fumiko-sensei, I was there when she pulled that pin. I could have stopped her. Could have at least tried. Haruko-san, you were 19, still a child, really. You can start over. Build something new. Haruko finally looked up, her eyes wet but determined. Do it. Take the job. Be the nurse you wanted to be before they turned you into a soldier. That night, Kimiko sought out Yuki. Found her in the recovery tent reading an English primer Lieutenant Mitchell had given her. The girl's transformation was remarkable. 3 weeks of proper food and medicine had erased years from her face. She looked 16 again, instead of 60. They offered you a job, Yuki said before Kimiko could speak. It wasn't a question. How did you know? Haruko-san told me. She thinks you should take it. I agree. Yuki-chan, I'm not going back, Yuki said, her voice suddenly fierce. Even when the war ends, even if there's anything to go back to, I'm not going to live in a country that gave me a grenade and told me it was mercy. The words hung in the air, raw and honest and terrible. What will you do? I don't know yet. Yuki closed her English primer carefully as if the book itself was precious. But I'm going to learn their language, understand how they think, why they value life when we were taught to glorify death. And maybe I'll find a way to live that doesn't require me to die for it. The next morning, Kimiko found Captain Chen in surgery. The patient was a Japanese soldier, Lieutenant Sakamoto, according to his papers. He'd been found in a collapsed bunker with a massive infection in his right leg. The limb had gone septic, flesh rotting from a shrapnel wound that had festered for weeks. Kimiko watched through the observation area as Chen worked with 2 other surgeons, their movements synchronized and efficient. They'd been at it for over an hour. Debridement and irrigation and antibiotic treatment. They're trying to save the leg, Lieutenant Mitchell said quietly, appearing beside Kimiko. Another hospital might have just amputated. Faster, safer. But Captain Chen thinks it can be saved. Why does she care? The question came out before Kimiko could stop it. He's just another enemy soldier. Is that what you think, that he's just another anything? Kimiko watched Chen inject yet another dose of penicillin directly into the infected tissue. How many vials was that? 5, 6, each one worth more than gold. For one man's leg. I think, Kimiko said slowly, that I was taught wrong. About everything. Mitchell smiled. That's a good start. The surgery took 4 hours total. When Chen finally emerged, she looked exhausted but satisfied. We saved it, she told her team. He'll walk again. Might have a limp, but he'll walk. She noticed Kimiko waiting and waved her over. Have you decided? Yes, Kimiko said. I'll take the job on one condition. Chen raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating. You said anyone with medical training. Haruko Yamamoto has more experience than I do. If you hire me, hire her too. Done, Chen said without hesitation. Anyone else? Yuki Tanaka. She's only 16, but she's smart and she learns fast. She could be a medical assistant, file clerk, something. I'll talk to Mitchell about it. Chen studied Kimiko's face. You understand what this means, working for us while the war is still going on. Some of your people will call you a traitor. Some of my people told me to blow myself up with a grenade, Kimiko said flatly. I'll take traitor over dead. Chen's laugh was unexpected, sharp, and genuine. Fair point. All right, Nurse Nakamura. Welcome aboard. Report to Lieutenant Mitchell at 0600 tomorrow. She'll get you set up with proper uniforms and paperwork. Uniforms. American uniforms, Kimiko realized. She'd be wearing the same outfit as the nurses who'd treated her. The same Red Cross armband. The symbol of mercy she'd been taught to see as weakness. That night, the 3 women, Kimiko, Haruko, and Yuki, sat together outside their tent, watching the sun set over the Pacific. The same ocean that had brought the American invasion, the same ocean that would eventually carry them to whatever came next. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Yuki asked softly. I think, Haruko said, that right and wrong are bigger questions than we were led to believe. But helping people heal, that feels right. That feels like something worth doing. Kimiko thought about the shelf of penicillin vials, about Lieutenant Sakamoto's leg, saved with enough antibiotics to treat 50 people, about dental fillings and chocolate bars and clean sheets, about Captain Chen's words, "Someone has to remember what it means to be human." "The war is ending," she said. "Japan is losing, maybe already lost. And when it's over, there will be millions of people who need help, who need medicine and food, and someone to tell them that what they believed was wrong. But they can choose differently now." She looked at her friends, these women who'd survived hell with her, who'd walked out of that cave expecting death and found humanity instead. "We can be part of that," Kimiko continued. "We can help our people understand what we learned, that the world is bigger than we were told, that there's another way to live." "A way that doesn't end with grenades in your pocket," Yuki murmured. "Yes." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Beautiful despite the war, despite the death, despite everything. Tomorrow, Kimiko would put on an American uniform and begin work in a hospital, treating her own people. She would translate. She would bandage wounds. She would explain to confused, frightened Japanese civilians and soldiers that the Americans were following rules, rules that valued life, even enemy life. It wouldn't be easy. Some would call her a traitor. Some would refuse her help. Some would die still believing the propaganda, still certain that death was preferable to this. But some would listen. Some would see what she had seen. Some would choose life over honor death. And maybe if enough people made that choice, the next war would be harder to start. Epilogue. The Shelf, August 15th, 1945. The Emperor's voice crackled over radio speakers throughout the medical facility. His words were formal, archaic, nearly incomprehensible to modern ears. But the meaning was clear enough. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. Kimiko stood in the supply room, one hand resting on that metal shelf. The penicillin vials were still there, dozens of them, restocked weekly, used daily to save lives that would have been lost in the caves. Around her, the facility buzzed with activity. Not celebration, exactly. The Americans didn't cheer. They just kept working, treating the same patients they'd been treating yesterday. Because for them, this wasn't about victory. It was about finally being able to stop killing and focus entirely on healing. In the recovery ward, Lieutenant Sakamoto was learning to walk again, leaning heavily on crutches but upright. Mobile, alive. His leg had healed, scarred and stiff, but functional. He would go home to his family in Kyoto. He would walk his daughter down the aisle at her wedding in 1951. He would live to be 73 years old. Because of 70 doses of penicillin, because some American doctors decided an enemy soldier's leg was worth saving. Haruko appeared in the doorway of the supply room, wearing her American uniform with the Red Cross armband. She looked different now, not just healthier, but somehow taller, more certain. "They're asking for volunteers," she said, "to go to mainland Japan, help set up medical facilities in the occupied zones, Tokyo, Osaka, Hiroshima." Hiroshima. They'd heard about Hiroshima, about the bomb, about devastation beyond imagining. "Are you going?" Kimiko asked. "Yes." "Someone needs to teach them what we learned, that the occupation won't be what the propaganda said, that the Americans follow their rules." Haruko paused. "Will you come?" Kimiko looked at the shelf one more time, thought about all the lives those little glass vials represented, all the deaths they prevented, all the mothers and fathers and sons and daughters who would go home instead of dying in caves. "Yes," she said, "I'll come." Las Torres. They would go to Hiroshima. They would help treat radiation victims with whatever medicine the Americans could provide. They would translate. They would explain. They would demonstrate over and over that the enemy they'd been taught to fear was bound by rules that valued human life. Even Japanese life, even the lives of people who'd tried to kill them. And slowly, painfully slowly, Japan would begin to understand what Kimiko had learned in that first moment of captivity. That the war had been lost before it started, Not because of superior firepower or better strategy or tactical brilliance, but because America had so much abundance, so much industrial capacity, so much material wealth that they could afford to treat their enemies with dignity. They could afford to waste penicillin on prisoners. They could afford to give chocolate to defeated schoolgirls. They could afford to follow rules that valued the individual over the collective, that treated healing as more important than victory. And that abundance, that overwhelming, incomprehensible abundance, was what had won the war. Not cruelty, not hatred, not superior warrior spirit, just prosperity, organized and deployed with devastating efficiency. Kimiko picked up one of the penicillin vials, holding it up to the light. Such a small thing, clear liquid in a glass tube, completely ordinary and completely revolutionary. This vial, this single dose of medicine, represented everything she'd learned, everything she'd been wrong about, everything that needed to change if Japan was going to survive the peace. "Nakamura-san," Haruko called from the doorway. "They're waiting." "Coming," Kimiko said. She set the vial back on the shelf carefully, making sure it was aligned with the others. Then she turned and walked out of the supply room, out of the medical facility, toward whatever came next. Behind her, the shelf remained, stocked, organized, ready. 73 vials of penicillin just sitting there, like it was nothing special, like saving lives was just what you did, like humanity was the baseline, not the exception. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important lesson of all.